In this video, we're going to talk about functions in Fusion 360 API. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to start learning about functions and classes in Fusion 360 API. Now, in the very first API video I did, I talked about functions and classes as well as variables. We talked about methods and parameters and how all these things sort of work together in a very general sense. But now, as we're beginning to learn more and more in Fusion 360 API, we need to start bridging the gap on creating our own custom functions as well as learning about classes. And part of the reason we need to do this is because if we go into scripts and add-ins, we go all the way down to the bottom of the scripts and we look at just some of the samples in here. So for example, if we take a look at Bolt and we edit this, it's going to pop up on the screen. It's on my other monitor here, and I'm going to trust the author. And when we look at an example like this, there's a lot more going on than some of the things that we've done so far. So you can see there's a bunch of default values that they declare at the very top. There's an empty variable called handlers, which is a list, which has these open brackets. And then there are some different things that come up, things like new component equals none. And then we've got def create new component. And as we go down through these examples, inside of this function, you can see that it's going to the active product, the casting to the active design, it's getting the root component, it's getting all of the occurrences for the root component, and it's getting new occurrences, and it's returning new occurrence dot component. So this function is doing something, and when it's called, this create new component is returning this new OCC dot component. And what's happening here in this specific example is it's creating a new component. So it's going through the process of actually creating a new component, and then it's going to return that new component. But you can see as we go down, we've got a class, and it's got this init self that's it's being declared this parameter. It's basically passing itself. Then it's passing arguments. And as we go through here, a lot of stuff is happening in each of these examples. And in order for us to be able to start to try to decipher these, we need to learn about, in this case, functions specifically. We'll try to get into classes in another video. It's a very big topic, and unfortunately, classes are a little bit harder for us to sort of unpack. So anytime you're looking at sample code from the Fusion 360 help file, or some of the ones that are already loaded in here under sample scripts or even sample add-ins, then you're going to have to do a little detective work to figure out what's going on. So let's start from the very ground level and let's declare some of our own functions and learn how those work. So I'm going to create a new script. I'm going to use Python, of course, that's what we're learning here. And again, I'm going to do API because I want this to be sort of at the top of my ever-growing list of scripts. And then I'm going to do custom function. So I'm just going to create this new script called custom function. I'm going to hit enter to accept it and then edit. And once again, it automatically puts it on my other screen. So I'm going to trust the author. And again, we get this sort of sample that you see on the screen. Anytime we create a new script, we're going to get the exact same thing. We get this UI message box that pops up and says hello script. But here's the important thing. This def run context, this is sort of the main block of code where everything starts to happen in all of our other programs, whether we were creating user parameters, whether we were asking the user to input a value, whether we were creating a sketch. We did everything in this one function. And it's important to note that functions that are defined by the DEF here, the functions will actually be able to perform an operation. It can read in a variable, you can pass it something, it can manipulate it, it can add to it, it can change it, and then it can return that back to your main line of code. So we're going to keep this the def run context here with the UI message box in it, and I'm going to change hello script to main function. So that way I know when it's running, main function is going to be displayed as the message box. I'm going to make a little bit of space because we're going to be working up above it before this. Now, it's not strictly required that additional functions in Python be created before. Other programming languages are a little bit more specific where they need to be. However, when we're talking about Python here, we can create new functions before or after, and it's not, as far as I know, it's not really going to have any effect on the program. If that's not true, if you happen to have a bit more information, then obviously please comment, let us know. But I have seen these functions before and after. For me personally, I like to put all of the functions I'm calling before, and it just kind of helps me visually when I'm making these. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to globally declare my app, Autodesk Core application, and my UI. Now, when I say I need to, it's not strictly required. However, we're currently calling or creating these variables inside of our program or inside of this custom function here, run. And that means that we're not going to have these available to us if we start creating other functions. So rather than recreate them every time, I'm going to create what I need at the very top. So I'm just going to say app equals adsk.core.application, exactly what we have in the def run context. Then we're going to do UI equals app.userInterface. So now we've essentially created the exact same thing here, app, Autodesk Core application, and UI app user interface. So now these are sort of globally available to us outside of a specific function. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own function. So I'm going to say def, that is the definition of our function. I'm going to call it custom function. You can call it whatever you want, but custom function is going to be the name I'm giving it. And then I'm going to put some brackets here, and we're going to end it with a colon. Now, at this point in time, if we decide that we don't want anything to happen yet in this custom function, the main thing that we would need to do is we would need to put in a line of code called pass. That means that we can still have this function, and as it's going through this program and it's sort of figuring things out, it'll be able to skip through it. Now, we don't actually need to do that here because we're going to put something in here, but just note that pass is one of those keywords in Python that will allow us to sort of make these placeholder functions even if we're not ready to populate them. So for me, I'm going to delete that, but just a quick note that pass might be helpful if you're trying to build out the top level of your program and you want to come back and sort of fix things later. So now that we have our new custom function, what's going to happen inside of it? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to say UI message box, and I'm going to just put some text in here as a string. I'm just going to say inside the custom function. And again, it's just a UI message box. It's going to be okay. And inside of my main function here, my def run, what I want to do is I want to call to custom function. So there are a couple things that we need to understand here. One, we can call and run a custom function. It could be called whatever we want, but again, we're using the name custom function. But we can call that from any other function that we want. And what's going to happen is when we call it, it'll run whatever is inside of here. And depending on what you do after the fact, it'll come back to your main function that you're running it in. So again, inside of our main function, we're calling app Autodesk Core application, UI app user interface. Those are just in there by default. I'm just going to leave them. And then it's displaying a message box, main function. Now from here, what I want to do is I want to call my custom function. So I'm going to just simply say custom function, close off my brackets, and that's all I have to do. Then I'm going to do another UI message box, and I'm going to say main function again, just so I have another box that pops up and it tells me what's going on. So let's save this real quick and let's just do a really quick refresher on what's going on. So inside of def run, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sending a message to the user that says main function. We're then calling our custom function, which will display inside the custom function. Then it'll hop back to our def run context, and it'll again display main function. I'm just going to go ahead and put a 2 after that, and I'll put a 1 after this one, just so that I know that they are coming in order. What we want to make sure happens here is that As it's going through and starting at the very top and running down, we don't see this inside of the custom function before main function one. That's really what we want to see. All right, so back in Fusion, we're going to go to add-ins and utilities, and we're going to do API custom function and run this. So that first text string that we see is main function one, then it hops inside of the custom function, then back out and displays main function two. So everything's working as expected. So let's take a look at the code again. So it did not display this first. It went to our def run context, displayed our message box main function one, then it called custom function, and then it went through and it used this UI message box main function two. So the terminology inside of here, def run context, is important because that's where everything that is going to happen is happening, at least by default, without really looking at the overall structure of the program. So when you're starting your new script, this is where you want to put everything that you want to happen. But now we know that we can create custom functions, as many as we want, and we can call them whenever needed. Now, if you're thinking about this from a sort of a logical perspective, this means that we can create a bunch of different functions. We can have conditional statements such as loops. We can do while or if else if statements. And depending on the user's response or what we're looking for, we can hop into different functions. But there is another level deeper that we need to understand, and that is passing variables to custom functions and also bringing those variables back, returning them. So we're going to take this in two steps. First, we're going to look at passing a function or passing a variable to our custom function and not requiring any values in return. So that first step, what we need to do is when we're defining our custom function, we need to put something in these brackets because right now it's empty, it's a placeholder, and that really just means that all we're doing is we're running our custom function and we're not handing off or sending back any sort of variable. So I'm going to call this new user string. You'll notice that it comes in orange, just like context here. And these are parameters that are created inside of the custom function. But see, now if we were to save this and run this, we should get an error from Fusion 360. So let's try to run it one more time. API custom function, main function one works fine, but then it fails as soon as it tries to go into our custom function. So let's take a look at the code and let's figure out why. So the first time we ran this, there was nothing inside of these brackets. So when we called the custom function, it didn't require us to pass anything to it. But now when we're looking at this custom function, it's expecting something in return. So now what we actually have to do is we have to send a variable, we have to define something to send into our custom function. I'm going to just put a string in here, and I'm going to call this user string. So now what we're saying is when we call custom function, we're passing user string. And now I'm going to do a second UI message box, and I'm going to just display that value. Now we have to think about this. The value or the string name is this parameter, new user string. So if we just simply display this new user string and save it, let's go ahead and see what happens. So add-ins, API, custom function. Now we're inside the main function. We jumped inside of the custom function, so this is great. We didn't get any error messages. We hit OK. Now we have another message box that is displaying that user string. That is the little bit of information that we passed to our function. Now we're back out into our main function. So everything's working as expected. So what we did at this point is when we called custom function, we simply passed the value user string inside of the custom function, and then we printed it out inside of the custom function. But what if you want to send it back? What happens if you want something to happen with this new user string, and then you want to send it back to your main function? Well, then we need to start defining new variables to contain that information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable called edit user string. I'm going to set that equal to my new user string plus, and I'm going to add some more string to it. I'm going to say space, and I'm going to say returned. So now what should happen is this new variable, which is gray because it hasn't been used yet, this new variable is now containing our string, whatever we passed inside of our custom function, which is user string, plus the string returned after it. But how do we get this back from our custom function to def run context? Well, the way that we do this is with a little bit of code that we just kind of have to know. We have to be able to remember this. So the keyword that we're going to use is called return. And we've used return in other programs, but we've only used return without actually passing a variable back. We've used return to sort of exit a function. But now what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass something back. So inside of our quotation marks, our single quotes in this case, we're going to put our curly brackets. You'll notice as soon as we put those in, they turn purple. Then what we're going to do outside of our single quotes is we're going to use dot format, and then inside of brackets, we're going to do our edit user string. So what's happening here is now what we're doing is we're returning a value inside of this bracket, and this dot format is important because the dot format will take in the args, and you can see here in the little the tooltip that's popping up, it says args and kwargs. Now, those are two things that we will get to when we start talking about classes. So the args is short for arguments, and kwargs is short for keyword arguments. So again, we'll talk about those when we get into classes. Right now, that's not really important. But what we have to know is this dot format is what's going to allow us to take the string and return that value or the version of it. The next trick to this is we need to pass it back into something. Right now, we're just calling our custom function, but we don't have any value that we can actually store that in back in the def run context. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this passed value, and we're going to set that equal to our call to custom function. Now, what we can do is we can have a UI message box, and we can just display that. There are two ways that we can do this, so we're going to talk about both of them, but first we're just going to simply display passed value. Let's go ahead and save this and do a quick run just to see what happens. So add-ins, API, custom function, we're inside of our main function 1. We hopped inside of the custom function. We have the user string value. Remember that we're taking that user string value and we're going to add to it. So now we have user string returned, main function 2. So everything works as expected. We took this UI message box, main function 1. We passed the value user string into our custom function. We displayed that user string. We edited the user string, called it edit the user string returned. We returned it back to our main function, and then we displayed it on the screen. I know that's quite a bit, and this is a very sort of basic contextual example, but I promise you that this is important. So before we move on, let's talk about the second thing that we can sort of do here. Now, I already mentioned that we're passing the value back from our custom function, and then we're displaying it with the UI message box. Another way that we could go about this is do our UI message box, and inside of here, we can actually call our custom function, and we can pass that value here. So what I'm going to do is, instead of passing the same user string, I'm going to call this new user string. So something different. Let's go ahead and save this, and let's take a look at what happens. So once again, we have our API custom function, main function. Inside the custom function, we passed it the user string the first time, and now we have our user string returned back in our main function. But the second time, it goes inside the custom function and spits out the new user string. Now we have new user string returned, main function 2, and we're all done. So let's look at the code one more time to make sure we understand what's happening. So inside of def run context, the first thing that we're doing is we're passing this message box main function 1. Then we create a value, or a variable I should say, passed value, and we're setting that equal to our call to custom function passing the user string parameter. So up here, once we call our custom function, it's going to be expecting this argument. It's going to be expecting that new user string. Now, once we pass it something, in this case the text, we are displaying a message box telling them that we're inside of our custom function. Then we're displaying what that user string was, and then we're changing it. We're editing the user string to be new user string returned. Once we've made that change, we're passing it back. So now we have it inside of this passed value. Then we have our message box, passed value. Now we looked at doing it a slightly different way. Instead of actually doing this UI message box passed value, what we ended up doing, I'm going to go ahead and comment these out. We ended up just calling the custom function directly inside of our message box, and we passed new user string. So now that we commented those two out, let's go ahead and run it one more time. And again, we're going to go into our API custom function, main function 1, inside the custom function, new user string is what we passed, new user string returned, main function 2. So all is good with that code. So this is, again, a very basic example, but hopefully it makes sense how we can go from our def run context, that little bit of code that's in every new API that we create, and how we can create our own custom functions. And not only create custom functions, but be able to pass a parameter, in this case, a variable, of this case, our string. It could be anything. We could pass numbers, and then actually do something with it and send it back to our main function. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and let's just take a look at one of the sample codes again. So in the add-ins, I'm going to go down to, let's just pick another one. Let's take a look at Spur Gear. This is one that's been around for quite a while. Let's edit this. Again, I'm going to trust the author. This one was made by Brian Eakins, and if you don't know, he is probably the main guy that deals with and has created the API in both Inventor and Fusion. So you'll probably see a lot of sample code from him. But as we look through here, again, there are some declarations at the very top. You can see here he creates some global decorations. The app and UI and units is empty. Then there are some command inputs because he's looking for things like pressure angle, module, number of teeth. And as we go down, def run context. So again, this is the standard bit that is in every script that you create. The try section and then the exception if something goes wrong. It has this format traceback, which gives you the error message that is passed to Fusion. But you can see inside of here in this def run context, it's grabbing the global app and UI and it's setting them equal to the core application and the user interface. The underscore before it, it's just a text thing. It doesn't really change the way that these work. It could just be app instead of underscore app. It's just, again, it's just kind of a formatting thing. But then you can see inside of here, it's calling for adding command definitions. This bit right here is talking about creating a dialog. And then it creates this variable here, on command created, and it calls to this class gear command created. So if we go down, you can see that there are classes, and inside of classes, there are functions. So get command input value is a function, and then gear command created handler is a class. And inside of the class, we have custom functions. So as you start to look through some of these sample codes, there's quite a lot going on and it's kind of hard to decipher, but hopefully you'll start to see that def and whatever the name of this new custom function is and what is getting passed through it. So anytime you see something like self, then that's really going to be something like the variable dot something else. So first dot name and last dot name were ones that are pretty standard when you're looking at classes and function definitions. But self just really means that it's passing itself as the first argument, and then this args is going to take any number of conditional arguments. And remember that quargs was a keyword argument. Keyword argument really just is different because it's looking for something like name equals, and that would be the keyword argument where it's looking for something very specific. If it's just args, that means it can take anything. It's not looking for something specific like name, date, class, or whatever. Again, these examples are, they're pretty complicated, unfortunately. It takes a lot to sort of decipher those. It's definitely something that I've been working on, but I won't even say that I understand 10% of it. But hopefully at this point, at least you have a good handle on creating your own custom function and understanding how to pass variables back and forth. From here, what I would suggest you do is you try to apply this to something simple, like getting input from the user. Or our last example, we talked about different message boxes and how you can have the message boxes based on the number of buttons, like a yes, no, retry, or yes, no, cancel. And depending on what the user actually does, whether they hit yes or no, send it into a different custom function. It's a great way to practice and figure out the functionality, passing things back and forth between these. That's as far as I'm going to take this example. If you have any questions, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.